Nova Sol hung in space like a blue-green jewel. The colony world was small, barely large enough to support 50,000 humans who had left Earth looking for a fresh start. They grew crops in the valleys, built cities that looked like smaller versions of the ones they'd left behind, and lived quiet lives at the edge of council space. It was peaceful. It was home. Then the Vrin Empire arrived. Governor Lee Hyunwoo was having breakfast when the first warning came through. His coffee went cold in his hand as he watched the display. 37 warships had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel. They hung above his world like birds of prey, and their weapons were already charging. "Get me Commander Nam," he said to his assistant. Commander Nam Jisoo arrived within minutes, still pulling on her uniform jacket. She was young for her rank, only 32, but she'd served on Earth's defense fleet before coming to Nova Sol. She took one look at the display, and her face went hard. Vrin Empire. War Master Kelth's fleet from the markings. She pulled up data on her tablet. He's never lost a battle. Conventional tactics, heavy firepower, overwhelming force. He wins by making resistance pointless, counting how long do we have. They'll send a surrender demand first. That's protocol. Maybe an hour before they start landing troops. Jisoo looked at the governor. "Sir, we can't fight that. We have one corvette and maybe 300 militia members with actual combat training. The rest are farmers and teachers and shop owners." "I know what we have, Commander." Hyunwoo stood and walked to the window. Outside, people were going about their morning routines. They didn't know yet. Didn't know that in an hour everything might be over. "What does the council say?" His assistant checked her console. "They've received our distress signal. They're sending a diplomatic vessel. It will arrive in 72 hours. 3 days. Hyunwoo laughed, but there was no humor in it. "By then we'll be under Vrin control or dead." The surrender demand came 30 minutes later. War Master Kelth's face filled every screen on the planet. He was reptilian, with scales that shimmered purple and gold and eyes that didn't blink. "Humans of Nova Sol, your world has been claimed by the Vrin Empire. You will surrender your weapons and submit to Imperial authority. You have 1 standard hour to comply. Resistance will be met with appropriate force." These terms are generous. I suggest you accept them. The transmission ended. Hyunwoo looked at Jisoo. "Appropriate force. What does that mean in Vrin terms?" "Orbital bombardment of military targets. Deployment of ground troops, occupation. They'll follow the council rules. Minimum civilian casualties, proper treatment of prisoners, all very civilized." Jisoo's voice was bitter. "They'll own us, but they'll be polite about it. And if we fight, then they'll use overwhelming force to end resistance quickly, still following the rules, but with maximum allowable violence. We'd last maybe 3 hours. Hyunwoo sat down heavily. Everything in him wanted to surrender, save lives, accept the occupation, and hope the council would eventually negotiate their freedom. That was the smart choice, the safe choice. But humans hadn't colonized distant worlds by making safe choices. "Commander Nam, how long could we hold out if we fought?" Jisoo blinked. "Sir? If we don't follow their rules. If we fight the way humans fight." "How long?" Understanding dawned in Jisoo's eyes. "You want to go guerrilla? I want to make them regret coming here." Jisoo was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled up a map of the colony. "The capital has 40,000 people. Too many to hide, too many to protect. But the rural settlements, we could evacuate people into the mountains, set up hidden camps. The Vrin fight in open terrain. They're not used to hunting for enemies. 300 trained fighters isn't enough. No, but we have 50,000 colonists, farmers who know how to use hunting rifles, engineers who know how to build things that go boom, teachers who can coordinate resistance cells." Jisoo's fingers flew over her tablet. "We can't win, but we can make them pay for every meter of ground." "How long, Commander? With hit-and-run tactics? Sabotage? Psychological warfare?" Jisoo looked up. "Maybe 3 weeks. Maybe a month. And then they'll crush us. 3 weeks for the council to send help. Sir, the council will tell us to surrender. This kind of resistance violates their warfare protocols. They'll condemn it." Hyunwoo thought of his daughter, safe on Earth, thought of the families on Nova Sol who had trusted him to keep them safe. "Then I guess we're about to become criminals. Send the evacuation order. And Commander? Make sure everyone knows this is voluntary. Anyone who wants to surrender can do so. No judgment. Exactly 3 people chose to surrender. 50,000 chose to fight." The Vrin landed their troops in the capital at exactly the predicted time. They came down in formation, their drop ships precise and coordinated. They expected to find resistance at the government buildings, maybe some militia groups making symbolic stands. They expected the war to be over by dinner. They found an empty. City War Master Kelth stood in the middle of the abandoned capital square and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: confusion. His soldiers searched building after building, finding nothing. No resistance. No defenders. No people. "Sir," his second-in-command reported, "we've found evidence of mass evacuation, recent within the last few hours. They've gone into the wilderness and then we follow them. Standard search pattern. They can't have gone far, but the humans had gone far. And more importantly, they'd learned from centuries of guerrilla warfare on Earth. They knew how to disappear." The first attack came that night. A Vryn patrol. 12 soldiers moving through a forest valley died without firing a shot. Buried explosives triggered remotely. The survivors reported seeing nothing, just the forest and then fire. The second attack hit a supply depot. Sabotage. The fusion cores melted down, taking out a week's worth of provisions and 3 transport vehicles. Again, no one saw the attackers. By the third day, Kelth understood what was happening. The humans weren't fighting a war. They were hunting his army. Commander Nam watched the Vryn base from a ridge 3 kilometers away. Her tablet showed thermal signatures, movement patterns, shift changes. She'd been watching for 6 hours, learning their routines. "They rotate guards every 4 hours," she said to the team around her. "They cluster their vehicles here near the command tent. That's overconfidence. They think we can't reach them, can we?" asked Pak Sungho, a farmer who'd been growing rice 2 weeks ago. Now he was carrying a rifle and learning to be a soldier. "We can reach anything if we're creative enough." Jisoo pointed at the display. "See that ridge behind their camp? It overlooks their position. Tonight, 3 of us climb that ridge. When their guard shift changes at midnight, we light them up. 30 seconds of fire, then we run. They'll chase us into the valley where the rest of the team is waiting with surprises." "Ambush the ambush," Sungho said. "That's dirty. That's how we stay alive." The attack went perfectly. The Vryn responded exactly as predicted, charging into the valley to catch their attackers. They ran straight into a minefield made from agricultural explosives. 20 Vryn soldiers died. The humans melted back into the forest like ghosts. Kelth studied the reports with growing frustration. His army was taking casualties but never seeing the enemy. His soldiers were scared, jumping at shadows. This wasn't how war worked. This wasn't civilized. "They're using terror tactics," his second-in-command said. "Psychological warfare. It's against council regulations. Then we respond with maximum force. Council regulations allow for escalation when faced with illegal tactics." Kelth pointed at the map. "We know they're in these mountains. We bombard the entire region from orbit, turn the mountains into craters. Sir, there are likely human civilians in those mountains, families, children." Kelth's claws flexed. By council law, he couldn't knowingly target civilians. But if the humans were hiding among civilians, using them as shields, the humans made this choice when they violated the rules of warfare. "Prepare for orbital strike." Governor Hyunwoo got the warning from one of their scouts. The Vryn fleet was moving into position. In 2 hours, the mountains would be slag. He called Jisoo on the emergency channel. "Commander, we need to evacuate." "Evacuate where?" "They're targeting the entire mountain range. We have nowhere to go that's safe." "Then what do we do?" Jisoo was quiet for a moment. "Then, we make them hesitate. By time, I need 30 volunteers. People willing to take a big risk." An hour later, 30 humans walked out of the mountains with their hands up. They moved slowly, broadcasting surrender signals, walking directly toward the nearest Vryn position. Kelth watched them on his monitors, suspicious. "What are they doing?" he asked. "Surrendering, sir, as is their right under council law. It's a trap, perhaps, but if we fire on beings who are trying to surrender, we violate council law ourselves. The moment that footage reaches Zenthar Prime, the council will turn on us." Kelth snarled but held his fire. The humans walked closer. One of them was carrying a white flag, an ancient symbol of peace that somehow every species understood. They were 50 meters from the Vryn line when they stopped. One of them, a young woman, spoke in clear council standard. "We surrender on behalf of Nova Sol. We request immediate ceasefire and council arbitration." The Grand Council chamber felt different this time. Captain Han Jiwoo stood in the same spot where he'd stood 6 months ago, but everything had changed. Then he'd been defending his actions. Now he was defending his entire species' right to exist as free beings. The gallery was packed. Representatives from every council world had come to witness this. The humans had brought their own delegation. Admiral Song Tae-young stood at the head of it, her uniform covered in medals from wars that most aliens couldn't even imagine. Dr. Choi Subin was there too, looking tired. She'd spent months preparing their defense. Lieutenant Park Minji sat in the back, her face carefully neutral. Counselor Eve Tharok's crystalline body pulsed with a deep red light. Anger, Jiwoo had learned. Or maybe sadness. With silicon-based life forms, it was hard to tell. This council is convened to vote on Resolution 7 Alpha, Tharok announced. The Human Combat Restriction Act. But before we vote, we will hear testimony. Admiral Song, you may speak first. Song stepped forward. She was 70 years old, small and gray-haired, and she looked like someone's grandmother. Right up until she started talking. Then you remembered she'd commanded Earth's defense fleet through 3 major conflicts. Honorable counselors, I stand before you representing humanity. Not just our soldiers, but every human who has ever put on a uniform to protect others. You want to ban us from combat, from security roles, from defending ourselves and our allies. You say it's for everyone's safety. She paused, looking around the chamber. I ask you this. Whose safety? Nova Sol had 50,000 civilians. The Vrin Empire came to conquer them. Those civilians picked up weapons and fought back, using every trick and tactic they knew. Yes, many died, but they died free. Under your proposal, they wouldn't have had that choice. They violated every rule of warfare, a counselor from the Pelthrin delegation said. They used terrorism, guerrilla tactics, psychological warfare. They made war into something ugly. War is ugly, Song replied. That's the secret you've all forgotten. You've made it into a game with rules and regulations. You've made it clean. But real war where everything is at stake, has never been clean. And it never will be, Tharok interrupted. Admiral, we understand your perspective. But you must understand ours. In the past year, humans have demonstrated combat capabilities that far exceed any other species. You win every engagement. You find solutions to impossible situations. You never accept defeat. This makes you unpredictable, dangerous. So you want to lock us away. We want to ensure that humanity's combat abilities are never again used in ways that traumatize other species, that violate the peaceful order we have built over millions of years. Song's expression hardened. You want us to be sheep. Before Tharok could respond, Ambassador Kale stood. The bird-like alien moved to the center platform, his feathers fluffed with agitation. May I speak, Counselor? You may, Ambassador Kale. Kale looked around the chamber. I have known humans for 3 years. I was at Velrock Station when Captain Jiwoo and his team saved my life. I have studied their history, their culture, their way of thinking, and I have come to a conclusion that terrifies me. Jiwoo felt his stomach tighten. Kale had been sympathetic before. If he'd turned against them. We are not afraid of human combat abilities, Kyle continued. We are afraid of what those abilities represent. Humans evolved on a world that tried to kill them constantly. They developed intelligence not for building civilization, but for surviving one more day. Every tool they created, they turned into a weapon. Every problem they faced, they solved with violence or the threat of violence. He turned to face the human delegation. You see warfare as problem-solving. When confronted with an obstacle, your first instinct is to find a way to destroy it. This is not evil. This is not even wrong. It is simply how you are built. But it is incompatible with a galaxy that has spent millennia learning to resolve conflicts without destruction. Then what do you suggest? Admiral Song asked. I suggest we acknowledge the truth. Humans are the galaxy's warriors. You are better at combat than any of us, and you always will be. The question is not whether to ban you from fighting. The question is whether we can trust you to fight for us rather than against us. The chamber erupted in debate. Voices overlapped, some calling for Kale's removal, others supporting his words. Tharok called for order. When silence finally returned, Dr. Choi Subin requested permission to speak. She moved to the platform, carrying a datapad. I have data, she said simply. Over the past 20 years, humans have been involved in 43 military actions in Council space. 43 times when violence occurred and humans were present. Want to know how many times humans started the fight? She held up her datapad. 0, not once. Humans have never initiated hostilities against a Council species. We have defended, rescued, and protected. but we have never attacked first. The methods, a counselor began. The methods are irrelevant if the intent is pure, Subin interrupted. You judge us by how we fight. We judge ourselves by why we fight. And we fight to protect. She pulled up more data. Here are the casualty figures from human interventions. At Velrock Station, 0 hostages died. During the Nova Sol occupation, 10,000 humans died, but they saved 40,000. In every engagement, humans prioritize saving lives over following protocols. Yes, we use brutal tactics. Yes, we fight in ways that seem uncivilized. But we win. And winning means people go home to their families. Commander Nam Jisoo appeared on a holographic projection. She was still on Nova Sol helping with the reconstruction. Her face was thinner than Jiwoo remembered, worn down by the war. Commander Nam, Tharok said, you led the resistance on Nova Sol. Do you regret your actions? No, counselor. Even though 40,000 of your people died? 40,000 died fighting for their home. Under the council's way, all 50,000 would have lived as slaves. Which is worse. Jisoo's voice was steady. You want to ban humans from combat because we're too good at it. But you miss the point. We don't fight because we're good at it. We fight because sometimes fighting is the only choice left. There is always another choice, Tharok said. Is there? Tell that to the hostages at Velrock. Tell that to the people the Vryn would have enslaved. You've built a galaxy where violence is controlled and predictable. That's beautiful. But it only works when everyone follows the rules. The moment someone doesn't, your system breaks. And that's where humans come in. We're the ones who can fight outside the rules. Another counselor spoke up. That is exactly why you must be restricted. You are chaos in an ordered system. No, Admiral Song said. We're the safety valve. The thing you call when the ordered system fails. The debate continued for hours. Experts testified about human psychology, about warrior cultures, about the evolutionary pressures that made humans what they were. Alien military commanders spoke about the trauma of facing human tactics. Rescued hostages spoke about their gratitude. Finally, as the station's sun set outside the Great Dome, Tharok called for final statements. Captain Jiwoo, you have been silent through most of this. Do you wish to speak? Jiwoo stood. He hadn't planned to say anything. Didn't know what he could say that hadn't already been said. But looking around at all these faces, all these beings who were trying to decide his fate, he suddenly knew what he needed them to understand. I'm not a hero, he said quietly. I'm just a person who was in the right place at the right time. Or the wrong place, depending on your perspective. I saw people who needed help and I helped them. That's all. He took a breath. You want to ban humans from fighting? Okay, I understand why. We scare you. We break your rules. We make war into something that haunts your dreams. But here's what you need to understand. We're not going to change. This is who we are. You can ban us from serving in your militaries, from working security, from carrying weapons, but you can't change what we are inside. And what is that, Captain? Tharok asked. Protectors, fighters, survivors, stubborn idiots who don't know when to quit. Jiwoo smiled slightly. You can make laws. We'll follow them. We're not monsters, but the first time someone threatens this council, the first time pirates attack a colony, the first time the rules fail and people are dying, humans will be there. Not because we're allowed to. Because we can't help ourselves. He looked at Minji, at Subin, at Admiral Song. You can ban human soldiers, but you can't ban human nature. The chamber fell silent. Tharok's light pulsed slowly, thoughtfully. Then we will vote. All in favor of Resolution 7 Alpha, the Human Combat Restriction Act. Lights appeared around the chamber. Green for yes, red for no. Jiwoo watched them multiply. Green, green, green. A few scattered reds, but not many. The final count appeared. 41 in favor. 6 against. The resolution passes, Tharok announced. Effective immediately, humans are designated Combat Class Omega, restricted. No human may serve in military capacity within Council space. No human may hold security positions on Council worlds. No human may engage in armed conflict except in direct self-defense on human-controlled territory. Admiral Song's face showed nothing, but Jiwoo saw her hands clench. Tharok continued. In compensation, humanity will receive expanded trade agreements, full access to Council technology archives, and 3 additional seats on the Council itself. 1 year after the Human Combat Restriction Act became law, the galaxy learned what peace without guardians looked like. Captain Han Jiwoo stood on the bridge of his cargo ship. The morning star, and watched the distress signal blink on his display. It was the fourth one this week. A merchant vessel attacked by pirates in the Helios Belt. The ship was calling for help that wouldn't come in time. Should we respond? His navigator asked. It was Yoon Kangman who'd been with him at Velrock Station. Most of Jiwoo's old crew had followed him into civilian life. They ran freight now, hauling cargo across council space. Legal work, safe work, boring work. We're not allowed to respond, Jiwoo said. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. We're civilians. We have no combat authority. Sir, they're dying. I know. They listened to the distress call until it cut off. 17 minutes later, a council security vessel arrived. They found debris and bodies. No survivors. Jiwoo filed his report and moved on. What else could he do? On Earth, Governor Lee Hyun-woo read the latest reports from across the galaxy. He'd left Nova Sol after the war, unable to stay on a world that reminded him of everyone he'd failed to save. Now he worked for the Human Council delegation, tracking what happened in the aftermath of the ban. The numbers were damning. Piracy was up 300%. Slaving operations that had been dormant for decades were active again. Small conflicts that would have been quickly resolved now dragged on for months. The galaxy was bleeding, death by 1,000 cuts. He sent his report to Admiral Song Tae-young. She read it in her office on Earth, where she was now retired. Forced retirement, technically. Humans couldn't serve in militaries anymore, even their own. Earth still had defense forces, but they were called Home Guard now and forbidden from operating beyond Earth's solar system. Song called an emergency meeting of the Human Council representatives. Dr. Choi Subin attended, along with former military officers who now worked as consultants and advisors. They met in a secure room and spoke carefully, knowing that Council intelligence probably monitored everything. The situation is deteriorating, Hyunwoo said, projecting the data. The Council's security forces are stretched thin. They're trained for civilized warfare. When they face real threats, enemies who don't follow the rules, they struggle. Struggle is putting it mildly, Song muttered. They're losing. The Kresh Hive launched coordinated attacks across 3 sectors last month. Council forces followed standard doctrine. Establish perimeter, call for reinforcements, engage at maximum standoff range. The Kresh just ignored them and hit civilian targets instead. How many dead? Subin asked. 50,000, and that's just what's been reported. The room fell silent. 50,000 dead. The same number that had lived on Nova Sol before the Vryn came. The difference was that Nova Sol had fought back. These civilians had waited for protection that never came. The Council is calling it an unprecedented crisis, Hyunwoo said. They're holding emergency sessions, proposing new regulations, new response protocols. But they're not addressing the real problem. Which is? One of the other humans asked. They don't know how to fight dirty, Song said. They've forgotten. Or maybe they never knew. For millions of years, they've fought wars like chess games. Now someone's flipped the board over and they don't know what to do. What about us? Subin asked. Are there any exceptions to the ban? None. Humans are combat class Omega. Restricted. We can defend ourselves if directly attacked. That's it. We can't serve as security. Can't provide military training, can't even consult on tactical matters without Council approval. And the Council isn't giving approval. 3 weeks later, the situation got worse. The Vryn Empire, which had been quiet since the Nova Sol incident, suddenly launched a new offensive. But this time they used different tactics. Tactics that looked suspiciously human. Ambushes, feints, psychological warfare. They'd learned from fighting Commander Namjasu and her colonists. Learned and adapted Council forces crumbled before them. War Master Kelth, who had been disgraced after Nova Sol, was now celebrated as a military genius. He gave interviews where he spoke openly about how fighting humans had taught him what real warfare looked like. They broke me, he admitted in one transmission that went viral across the Council networks. Those human farmers and teachers broke my army spirit. But they also showed me the future of warfare. A future where rules are tools, not chains. Where victory matters more than honor. The Council watched in horror as their own rules were used against them. Kelth would request negotiation, then attack during the talks. He'd retreat to draw pursuers into ambushes. He'd fake casualties to lure relief forces into traps. Every trick was legal, technically. But combined together, they made war into something the Council couldn't handle. 6 worlds fell in 2 months. Ambassador Kale sat in his quarters on Zenthar Prime and watched the news with a feeling of sick inevitability. He'd known this would happen. had tried to warn them, but the Council had been so sure that banning human soldiers would make the galaxy safer. Instead, they'd just shown everyone else how to fight like humans, and nobody was better at it than humans themselves. His door chimed. When he opened it, he found Captain Jiwoo standing there looking older than he had a year ago. "Ambassador," Jiwoo said, "I need to speak with you. Unofficially." They sat in Kale's quarters, drinking something that smelled like cinnamon but tasted like regret. Jiwoo explained his situation, how he'd been hauling cargo, watching people die unable to help, how every day the news brought reports of conflicts that could have been prevented if humans had been there. "I feel useless," Jiwoo admitted. "My whole life I trained to protect people. Now I'm hauling rice and watching the galaxy burn. What would you have me do, Captain? The ban is law. The ban is killing people." Jiwoo leaned forward. "Ambassador, I know you argued against it. I know you tried to find a middle ground. Help me understand. Why did they do this?" Kale's feathers fluffed and smoothed, a sign of deep thought. Because they were afraid. But more than that, because they couldn't imagine a galaxy where their rules didn't work. For millions of years, the Council has maintained peace through predictable, limited warfare. Conflicts happened, yes, but they were contained, civilized. Then humans arrived and showed everyone that there was another way. A more effective way, and that terrified them, so they banned us. They tried to put the chaos back in the box, but chaos doesn't work that way. You can't uninvent knowledge. Every species that saw how humans fought, they learned. Now that knowledge is spreading and the Council has no defense against it. Then they need to lift the ban. Kale laughed, but it was a sad sound. The Council will never admit they were wrong. That's not how they work. They'll let the galaxy bleed before they acknowledge their mistake. What if we don't ask permission? Kale's eyes widened. Captain, that would be a violation of Council law. You'd be criminals, we'd be alive, and so would the people we save. They stared at each other across the table. Outside, stars turned in their ancient dance, uncaring about the politics of tiny beings on tiny worlds. "I can't help you," Kyle said finally, "but I can't stop you either. If a human ship happened to be in the right place at the right time, and if that ship's crew happened to defend themselves and others from attack, well, the law allows for self-defense. Even if we seek out situations where self-defense might be necessary, the law is not always clear on intent." Jiwoo left that meeting with a plan forming in his mind. He contacted his old crew, Minji, Kangmin, Daeho, all of them running civilian ships hauling cargo dying inside a little more each day. "I'm forming a company," he told them. "Private security. We'll escort merchant vessels through dangerous space. Technically, we're just armed civilians protecting our clients. That's a thin line." "Captain," Minji said, "it's the only line we have." Within a month, Jiwoo Security Solutions had 50 employees. All former military, all itching to do something useful. They took contracts protecting merchant ships, escorting refugees, guarding trade stations. They didn't fight unless attacked first, but somehow they were always in places where attacks happened. Piracy dropped 70% in the sectors where they operated. The Council noticed. Of course they noticed. But what could they do? Humans were allowed to defend themselves. The fact that they defended themselves very effectively, and that their presence seemed to deter violence, well, that was just coincidence. Other human security companies formed. Former soldiers became consultants and advisors. Admiral Song started a training program, teaching aliens about human military history. Purely educational, of course. If those aliens happened to use that education to defend their worlds, Song couldn't be held responsible for how her students applied their knowledge. Dr. Choi Subin published a paper titled The Predator's Peace. She argued that humanity's presence in the galaxy had maintained stability through deterrence. Criminals and aggressive powers had thought twice before acting, because they knew humans might respond. With humans banned from combat, that deterrence was gone. The paper was controversial, but it was also true. Then the Vryn Empire made a mistake. War Master Kelth, confident in his human-learned tactics, attacked a Council core world. The Grand Council chamber on Zenthar Prime was older than human civilization. Its walls had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth of peace treaties that lasted millennia, and debates that shaped the fate of billions. Today, those ancient walls would witness something new. Today, they would judge humanity. Captain Han Jiwoo stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by representatives from 47 species. Above him, the great dome displayed the stars. Around him, beings of crystal and gas and flesh watched with eyes that had evolved under alien suns. He had never felt more human than he did in that moment. Counselor Eve Tharok spoke first. The silicon-based lifeform's voice sounded like rocks grinding together, translated through speakers that made it sound almost gentle. Captain Jiwoo of Earth, you stand before us to answer for your actions at Velrock Station. Do you understand the charges? I understand them, Counselor, Jiwoo said. His voice didn't shake. He'd faced down worse than this, or at least he'd faced down things that tried to kill him faster. Then let us begin. Tharok gestured with an appendage that might have been an arm. The chamber's holoprojectors lit up, showing footage of the Velrock incident from a dozen angles. Jiwoo watched himself on the screens. Watched his team move through the ventilation system. Watched them drop into the diplomatic wing like they'd done it 1,000 times before. To him, it looked like a textbook rescue operation. From the sounds around the chamber, the aliens saw something very different. Ambassador Kale Threven was called to testify first. The bird-like alien stood at the witness platform, his feathers pressed flat against his body. A sign of distress in his species. Ambassador, you were present during the incident. Describe what you witnessed. Kale's beak clicked nervously. I saw humans do things that should not be possible. They moved through secured areas without triggering alarms. They used the station's own systems against it, and they deployed chemical weapons in an area with hostages. Sleeping gas isn't a weapon, Jiwoo said before he could stop himself. Tharok's crystalline body flashed. A warning. You will have your chance to speak, Captain. For now, please allow the witnesses to testify. Next came General Morant. The Drakthir commander's scales were a deep green, the color of unease in his species. I have served in the Galactic Defense Force for 80 cycles. I have studied warfare as practiced by every major civilization. I have never seen anything like what the humans did. Please elaborate, General. Marant's claws flexed. They didn't follow any doctrine, any pattern. There was no preliminary force probe, no negotiation, no warning. They simply appeared, accomplished their objective, and disappeared. It was, he paused, searching for words. It was like being hunted. Murmurs ran through the chamber. Jiwoo felt his jaw tighten. They were making it sound like he'd committed a crime. All he'd done was save lives. Dr. Choi Subin stood from the human delegation. She was a xenopsychologist, sent by Earth to help defend humanity's actions. She was also the smartest person Jiwoo had ever met. Counselor Tharok, may I speak? You may, Dr. Choi. Subin moved to the center platform. She held up a data pad and images filled the chamber. Pictures of Earth. Ancient Earth. From before humans reached the stars. Humans evolved differently than most species in this chamber. She began. We are persistence predators from a death world. For millions of years, we survived not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we were the most adaptable, the most creative, the most stubborn. She pulled up more images, battlefields throughout human history. We have been at war with each other for our entire recorded history. We have fought with sticks and stones, with swords and arrows, with bullets and bombs. We have fought in deserts and jungles, in mountains and oceans, in the air and in space. We have never stopped learning new ways to fight. This is precisely what concerns us, Tharok said. A species bred for warfare. No, Counselor. A species bred for survival. There's a difference. Another witness took the stand. A small mammalian alien who had been among the hostages. She trembled as she spoke. The humans appeared from nowhere. One moment I thought I would die. The next, a human was carrying me to safety. He didn't ask my species, didn't ask my rank. He just saved me. But the methods, one of the counselors began. The methods saved my life, the small alien's voice cracked. I don't care if they were civilized or not. I care that I'm alive to testify today. The chamber fell silent. Jiwoo watched Subin, saw her make a small gesture. Keep going. This was the opening they needed. Lieutenant Park Minji was called next. She walked to the platform with her head high, her uniform pressed and perfect. She looked every inch the professional soldier. Lieutenant Park, you served under Captain Jiwoo at Velrock. Did you at any point question his orders? No, Counselor. Why not? Surely you knew you were violating protocols. Minji's expression didn't change. I knew we were saving lives. That's what soldiers do. At least that's what human soldiers do. Even at the cost of galactic law. The law said we should wait. Wait while people died. That's not a law I can follow, more murmurs. Jiwoo felt a surge of pride. Minji had always been braver than she looked. Tharok called for order. When the chamber quieted, he spoke again. We have reviewed the footage extensively. We have consulted with military experts from 17 species. The conclusion is unanimous. Humans do not fight like any known civilization. Is that a crime? Jiwoo asked. It may be, Captain. Tharok's body pulsed with light. Let me show you something. The holo projectors lit up again. This time they showed battle footage from across the galaxy. Alien warfare. Jiwoo watched, fascinated despite himself. The battles looked more like dances than fights. Two fleets would meet in space, exchange fire at prescribed ranges and withdraw when casualties reached an acceptable threshold. Ground forces would face each other across open fields using tactics that hadn't changed in thousands of years. This is how civilized species conduct warfare, Tharok explained. With honor, with restraint, with rules that both sides understand and follow. Wars are won not through deception, but through superior strategy within agreed parameters. You make war into a game, Jiwoo said quietly. We make war into something that doesn't consume entire civilizations, Tharok's voice echoed through the chamber. We learned millions of years ago that unrestricted warfare leads only to extinction. So we developed codes, rules, ways to settle disputes without destroying ourselves. Subin stepped forward again. And humans never learned those rules because we were alone. We had only ourselves to fight. We had to innovate or die. Precisely, Dr. Choi. And that is what terrifies us. Tharok dimmed his light, his version of a sigh. Let me show you one more thing. The footage changed. It showed Kresh soldiers from the Velrock incident. But these weren't the terrorists from that day. This was footage from later, from the medical center where they'd been taken after the gas knocked them out. The Kresh were awake now, but something was wrong. They huddled in corners, flinched at sudden movements. One of them kept chittering the same phrase over and over. The translator provided the meaning. They came from nowhere. They came from nowhere. They came from nowhere. Trauma, Subin said softly. Yes, trauma. Psychological damage that our medical technology cannot easily repair. Tharok gestured at the screens. These soldiers were professionals, veterans. They had seen combat before, but they had never faced an enemy that ignored all rules, that appeared from impossible angles, that won without even engaging in direct combat. Jiwoo felt something cold in his stomach. He'd known the operation went well. Too well, maybe, but he hadn't thought about what it meant for the Kresh. Hadn't thought about the fact that their minds couldn't process what had happened. In our galaxy, Tharok continued, warfare is traumatic for the body but not the mind, because the mind knows what to expect, knows the rules. When humans fight, they break something deeper. They break the certainty that the universe follows predictable patterns. Ambassador Kale spoke up from his seat. I have known Captain Jiwoo for 2 years. He is honorable, kind. He risked his life to save beings he had never met, but watching him work that day, Kale's feathers fluffed and then flattened again. I finally understood why Earth has so many stories about monsters. Humans know what they are capable of. They know what lurks inside them. We're not monsters, Minji said sharply. No, Kyle agreed. You're something more frightening. You're people who can become monsters when necessary, and then go back to being people again. You have a switch that the rest of us don't have, or that we lost millions of years ago. The chamber erupted in debate. Voices in 100 languages translated and overlapping, all saying the same thing in different ways. Fear, uncertainty. The galaxy had lived in peace for so long that they'd forgotten what real warriors looked like. Tharok called for silence. It took several minutes. When the chamber finally quieted, he spoke with finality. Captain Jiwoo, Lieutenant Park, you are not criminals. You are in fact heroes by your own species standards. But you are also proof of something we cannot ignore. Humanity is too effective at warfare. Too creative. Too unpredictable. You do not fight to win honorably. You fight to survive at any cost, and that's bad? Jiwoo asked. The alarm screams cut through Velrock Station like a knife. Captain Han Jiwoo looked up from his coffee, his body already moving before his mind caught up. 20 years in the military had taught him to recognize the difference between a drill and the real thing. This was real. All diplomatic personnel to secure rooms immediately. Hostile forces have breached Sector 7. This is not a drill. The station's AI spoke in that calm voice that made everything worse somehow. Jiwoo grabbed his jacket and ran toward the docking bay where his ship, the New Dawn, sat waiting. Around him, aliens of a dozen different species moved in organized lines toward their designated safe zones. They walked quickly but without panic. It was strange to watch. Even in an emergency, they followed the rules. Lieutenant Park Minji was already at the ship when he arrived. She had her data pad out and was scanning the security feeds. "Captain, it's bad. The crash took the entire diplomatic wing, maybe 200 hostages. They're demanding the council release their queen from prison. The crash were insectoid creatures, all chittering mandibles and too many legs. Most of them were peaceful traders, but some groups had turned to terrorism after the council imprisoned their matriarch for war crimes. Jiwoo had read about them in the briefings. He hadn't expected to meet them like this. "What's the station doing?" he asked. Minji shook her head. "Following protocol, General Morant has established a perimeter around the diplomatic wing. He's calling for negotiators. The specialized hostage unit won't arrive for at least 6 hours." 6 hours? Jiwoo stared at her. "People could die in 6 hours. That's how they do things out here, sir. Everything by the book, controlled, predictable." Jiwoo walked to the viewport and looked out at the station. Somewhere in there, hundreds of beings were trapped with terrorists. And everyone was just waiting. It made his teeth hurt. Ambassador Kale Threven appeared on their communication screen. The bird-like alien's feathers were ruffled with stress. "Captain Jiwoo, I must insist you remain on your vessel. General Morant has made it very clear that no one is to interfere with the security response." "How many hostages, Ambassador?" 217. "But please, you must understand. We have procedures for this. The creche will negotiate. They always do. No one has to die today." Jiwoo closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw a dozen missions. A dozen times when waiting meant death. "With respect, Ambassador, I've heard that before. It's usually right before someone dies." He cut the connection. Minji was watching him with that look. She knew what he was thinking. They'd served together for 5 years. She could read him like a book. "We're going in, aren't we?" she said. "Get Yoon and Daiho. Tell them to bring everything we've got." 20 minutes later, 4 humans stood in the maintenance corridor that ran behind the diplomatic wing. Yoon Kangmin carried the breaching equipment. Kim Daeho had medical supplies and what weapons they could scrounge from the ship's emergency locker. Nothing fancy. Humans weren't allowed military-grade weapons in council space. They had to make do with what was technically defensive equipment. "Sir, we're about to violate about 15 different council laws," Daeho said. He didn't sound worried. "Just stating facts." "Add it to my file," Jiwoo said. "Kangmin, can you get us in?" The young engineer studied the wall panel. "The maintenance hatches aren't even locked. They don't think anyone would be crazy enough to go through the ventilation system. Then they don't know humans very well. They move through the station's guts like rats through walls. The ventilation system wasn't designed for people to crawl through, but it was big enough for the station's maintenance drones. That meant it was big enough for humans who didn't mind tight spaces." Minji led the way, her slim frame squeezing through gaps that made even Jiwoo nervous. They could hear the creche through the walls now, the clicking, chittering sound of their language. And underneath that, the quiet sobbing of someone who was very afraid. 20 hostiles, Minji whispered through her comm. "Hostages in the center of the room. The creche have them surrounded, but they're not watching all angles. They're focused on the main entrance." Of course they were, because in galactic warfare, attacks came from the front. Predictable, controlled. By the rules. Humans didn't fight by rules. Jiwoo made his decision in 3 seconds. "Kangmin, how fast can you flood this section with sleeping?" "Gas? The station's emergency systems, maybe 90 seconds after I trigger them." "Do it. Minji, Daeho, we go in exactly 2 minutes after the gas starts. Masks on. We grab as many hostages as we can and we run. No fighting unless we have to. What about the creche? Deho asked. The gas will put them down. Probably. Their biology is different, so I can't be sure. But most of them should just fall asleep. Kang Min's fingers flew over his datapad, hacking into systems that were supposed to be secure. The station's AI didn't even notice. Why would it? No one ever tried this kind of thing. The gas started with a hiss. Jiwoo counted seconds in his head. He heard confusion from the creche. They didn't understand what was happening. Their clicking grew frantic, then started to slow. Now, Jiwoo said. They dropped from the ceiling like ghosts. 4 humans in breathing masks, moving through the gray fog of sleeping gas. The creche were falling, their multiple legs folding under them. A few were still conscious, trying to raise weapons with mandibles that didn't want to work anymore. Jiwoo grabbed a small alien child, some species he didn't recognize. We're getting you out. Stay quiet. They moved fast. Grab a hostage, point them toward the exit, grab another. The hostages were confused, scared, half asleep from the gas themselves. But they moved. Humans pushed and pulled and carried them. There was no time for explanations. One of the creche lunged at Minji. She didn't shoot it. She just stepped aside and let it crash into the wall, already falling unconscious. Efficient. Quick. No wasted movement. 18 minutes after they entered, they emerged with the last hostage. 217 beings stood in the corridor, coughing and confused but alive. Every single one. General Morant arrived with his security force just as Jiwoo was pulling off his breathing mask. The reptilian commander's scales had gone pale with shock. What did you do? Extracted the hostages, sir, Jiwoo said calmly. You can't just... There are procedures, protocols. You could have started a massacre. But we didn't. Jiwoo looked at the crowd of hostages, already being checked by the station's medical teams. Everyone's alive, everyone's safe. Mission accomplished. Ambassador Kale pushed through the crowd. His bird-like eyes were huge. How did you... No one fights like that. It's not civilized. Minji stepped up beside her captain. With respect, Ambassador, we didn't fight at all. We just went around the problem instead of through it. Later, when the station's security feeds were reviewed, the alien commanders would watch the footage over and over. They couldn't understand it. The humans had violated every principle of proper warfare. They'd used deception, moved unpredictably, struck from an unexpected angle. They'd risked themselves in ways that made no tactical sense, and it had worked perfectly. In his office, General Morant watched the footage again. He froze it at the moment when Jiwoo had dropped from the ceiling, appearing like some predator from ancient history. The general's claws trembled slightly as he reached for his communication console. Get me the council, he said quietly. They need to see this. They need to understand what humans are capable of. He didn't say the rest out loud. Didn't say what he was really thinking. That for the first time in his long military career, he had seen something that terrified him. Not the violence, not the danger, but the fact that humans made war look like art.